Welcome to the Transformative Pursuit with Dr. Christopher Cohn. We're glad you have joined us and pray the content will be helpful and encouraging. The pursuit starts now.
Well, hello and welcome to the Transformative Pursuit. This is episode 19, and in this episode we're going to start a series on corporate versus individual eschatology. Wow, that sounds like fun, doesn't it? Corporate versus individual or personal eschatology. Now, essentially what we're talking about here is the future for the nations, Israel, the church, versus the future for individual believers, and how the distinctions biblically impact how we understand our lives, how we understand how we're to engage with other people, and just understanding God's plan. It's pretty significant as we look at these biblical distinctions. Well, the Transformative Pursuit is brought to you by Agathon University of Applied Faith, agathonu.com, agathonu.com. Deepen your skill in the biblical worldview. Learn fully online and at your own pace. Learn starting at $78 per credit hour. Whether you want to enhance your growth through a degree program, earn a certification to enhance your service and leadership skills, or simply take classes for personal enrichment, Agathon University has an educational plan and path that fits you. Well, let's kind of think through corporate eschatology as we look at the contrast and the distinction between corporate and individual or personal eschatology. All we mean by that is that in the future, things are going to happen individually for people as individuals versus nations and the church. And of course, one of the reasons to talk about this is that there is a perceived merging and treating the church and Israel as either the same or supersessionism, which is the idea that the church has superseded Israel in God's plan, or replacement theology is the most common term, that the church has replaced Israel in God's plan. Well, there are a number of different theological systems that would kind of lead to this idea. And we're going to get a little bit technical as we think through these things because we want to understand biblical distinctions with respect to Israel and the church and ourselves. And many of the confusing passages of Scripture are confusing because we don't recognize those distinctions. So we're going to tackle these distinctions from an eschatological framework. And eschatology is just study of the last things, of course. And we're going to think through the differences between Israel and the church and individuals. So when we talk about corporate versus individual or corporate versus personal eschatology, that's all we're talking about. So let's look at 5 major views related to the kingdom in order to understand corporate eschatology. So in this episode, that's our focus, is dealing with corporate eschatology. And when I say corporate, I'm not talking about businesses. I'm talking about corporate, which is collection of individuals, right? Versus individual eschatology or personal eschatology, which pertains to you and to me. We'll look at that and the applications and implications of that in our next episode. So 5 major views and a lot of variations in these particular views. First of all is amillennialism. Amillennialism is the perspective, well, think about when you see the term millennial or hear the term millennial, it is referencing the 1,000-year reign of Christ in Revelation chapter 20. And it's interjecting an understanding of that 1,000 years, what that means, and its timing. Okay, so amillennialism says that there is no millennium, no kingdom. Is that alpha prime, which eliminates or negates what follows. So amillennialism, no millennialism. Revelation 20 describes a literal reign of Christ, a kingdom that the first 1,000 years are talked about in Revelation 20. The first 1,000 years are prophesied, and we're going to get into some of those details. Amillennialism teaches that there is no literal kingdom. Therefore, the kingdom is a spiritual thing, okay? And Israel and the church in this perspective are really equal. They're the same. So the church in this perspective started back with Adam. And one of the key groundings for this idea is that the term assembly is used in the Greek Septuagint, for example. The term that's later translated as church is the term ecclesia. We do see that in the Septuagint. So isn't the church an Old Testament thing? Hasn't it always been? Well, no, frankly. Jesus describes this in Matthew chapter 16. He says that on this rock, and he's referencing himself, see Peter's writings, chapter 2, 4 through about verse 12, I think he deals with that. But Jesus says, referencing Isaiah 7 and 8, he says, on this rock, himself, I will build, future tense, my assembly, ecclesia, my church. So there is a future church, as of Matthew 16, a future church that Jesus would establish, that he would build. It would be his church, his assembly. Pardon me. And on this, him, he would build that church. He would be the cornerstone, as we see. So the church is distinct from Israel, which is a nation. The church is not a nation. If we take things at face value with a normative, literal, grammatical, historical perspective. And this is where the different views diverge in their hermeneutic methodology, right? Their hermeneutic principles. So amillennialism says there is no actual physical, literal kingdom, but the kingdom is to be allegorized or spiritualized, and it is a spiritual kingdom. Therefore, if there's no true socio-political, literal kingdom because of the allegorization, well, you can allegorize the nation of Israel. It's not really a nation. Or you can even allegorize the church. It isn't this future thing that Jesus was prophesying in Matthew 16. On the other hand, it's just a spiritual thing, and so is the nation of Israel. So it all gets mushed together, blended together, with no distinctions whatsoever. Now, how does that happen and why? It happens by the theological pre-commitment to Israel not being at the center of God's plan anymore, which sounds kind of mean. Well, it kind of is. But imagine this. Imagine that you are in 400 AD, okay? And you're trying to make sense of the biblical record. And you see almost literally 3,000 references in the biblical record to Israel. 3,000. It's like 2,986 or something like that. It's almost 3,000. By the way, that's almost twice as many instances of the words Jesus and Christ. Now, that's not to say that Israel is more important than Jesus, of course, but it is to say there's something really significant happening here that we need to be very attentive to. Israel matters to God. Okay, so you have these many, many references, and it's 400 AD, and you're trying to make sense of these 3,000 references to Israel, and you look around and you don't see any Israel. There's no Israel on the planet because they were wiped out in 70 AD. Now, obviously, there are Jewish people all over the planet, but there's no nation of Israel. So therefore, either God could not mean what he said, or he's mistaken, or he's lied. Because it can't be actual Israel, because there is no Israel on the planet. Okay, so the maneuver is the theological pre-commitment that Israel can't mean Israel. So we're trying to defend God from himself, really, because if he meant what he said, then he's got problems because he would have been wrong. So we know he wasn't wrong, so he couldn't have meant Israel, because there's no Israel. Again, you're 400 AD, you're looking around, there's been 330 years of no Israel on the planet. Where are you going to go from there, right? Now imagine it's 700 AD, and you're looking back and you've got an additional 300 years of no Israel on the planet. And then the 1000 AD, you've got almost 1,000 years, almost a full millennium, where Israel is not named on the planet, and yet 3,000 times in Scripture Israel is named. Well, what do you do with that? Again, amillennialism is a very popular historic view, and I give it the benefit of the doubt that that's what they're trying to do, is trying to defend God, provide an eschatological apologetic, because there's no Israel on the planet. The problem is, instead of taking God at face value, we are assuming that God can't mean what he says because we don't see it as plausible that he could mean what he says. Oh, well, of course, here we go, 1948, almost another 1,000 years later, and now we have Israel as a sovereign nation on the planet again, which causes some people to look around and say, wait a minute, maybe we have missed on this important theological idea. Well, you've got now almost 2,000 years of teaching in the church. And it's not the only teaching. There are other forms of millennialism that we'll talk about in this series. But amillennialism was dominant because of this dynamic that I'm describing. There's no Israel on the planet at the time, at least not in a socio-political sense. So amillennialism looks at Israel and spiritualizes it, because can't be actual Israel because Israel's gone. The promises of future blessing cannot be literally understood because Israel's gone. The church has to have been in existence from the very beginning, and the kingdom cannot therefore be a literal physical kingdom in Israel, with Israel at the center, with Christ on the throne of David. That just can't really be. So that is amillennialism, and the implications of it are essentially that the kingdom is in our hearts, the kingdom is a spiritual thing, and we are building and establishing the kingdom in a spiritual sense, and one day Christ will return. That we can't spiritualize in the amillennial view, but it is to an established kingdom on earth that is a spiritual one. Okay, so that's amillennialism. And it really relies on a theological pre-commitment in allowing our experience to dictate our theology. Now, we do this all the time, but it's highly problematic because our experience is a poor theologian. Our experience can be deceptive. One person's experience can be very different from another's. And the consequence is we're setting out dogma and doctrine based on an individual's experience. That's problematic. So we don't want to do that, except in this particular perspective and on the part of I would say a majority stream in church history. That's been exactly what we've done, is we've set our theology based on our experience. Now, it's not the only stream. I mentioned there are 4 other major views, but I wanted to just introduce the context and this concept in our first discussion as we think about corporate versus individual and personal eschatology. Some of these key distinctions and differentiators as we consider amillennialism, that there's no actual physical, literal kingdom on the planet. It's just a spiritual thing, and Israel and the church aren't really distinct. Or if they are, God's done with Israel and the church has replaced it. But there are a couple of different views there. But the bottom line is this. God didn't mean what he said. Israel doesn't mean Israel. The church predates Jesus' prophecy that he would build the church. And the kingdom is a spiritual thing and not a literal, physical, socio-political thing. Well, as you consider these things and search the scriptures to see what reality is, enjoy your study. We'll come back next time with more on corporate versus individual eschatology.